we've got to do some technical stuff to set these guys up, but I don't think they need a whole lot of introduction.
Yeah, they do.
These guys have been members, I think, longer than I have, and they paddled around the island this summer. And how many people in this group have paddled around our island? I know one person has. Yeah, so, I think anybody that does that is pretty spectacular and crazy.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Bob and Elizabeth?
Yep.
So here's
Thanks, Fred. Welcome, everyone. There's,
Just wait till, make sure that.
yeah, I have a few introductions
Okay.
words that I can say.
Okay, put it on a picture.
I'm really happy that I'm standing in front of a friendly and patient crowd, and there's three reasons for that. The first is Elizabeth and I haven't done a long presentation like this before.
Ever.
The second reason is we did the presentation in PowerPoint, and I haven't looked at PowerPoint for about 10 years.
And I never have.
And it's gotten much more complicated, and Elizabeth hasn't. And the third reason is there's a glitch, an incompatibility between our version of PowerPoint and the one on the club computer. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to switch the slides with that computer and this remote. I'm saying this so I can remember.
Yeah.
And we need our speaking notes, and they're on this computer. So we're going to change both computers at the same time. Perfect. So I don't know if it's going to work with those three things going on at the same time, but we'll see.
Fred, can you zoom these lights?
So our group consisted of 3 people: Elizabeth, my wife, myself, and our friend Marg Reese. Marg isn't here tonight because she lives in Canmore, Alberta. We made our fun name, Bobby and the Sea Stars, for the Facebook page we set up for this trip. Originally, we planned the trip as a 60-day wander, quote, wander, around Vancouver Island. But along the way, it quickly became evident that we weren't going to be able to do this in 60 days by wandering. So we've changed that. Well, the first part of this presentation is going to be focusing on the trip planning and preparation for this trip, and I'm hoping you'll find it useful for any kayak trip. And the second half will be a summary of the trip using maps, photographs, and statistics with an emphasis on challenges along the way. So why do we want to do this? Seems like an obvious question. Well, for me, I love exercise. In terms of what I like about multi-day self-propelled camping trips is the exercise experience, the being in the present, and the wilderness experience. All three of those together is great. And then if we can add camaraderie to that, then that's even better. What I think of the self-propelled trip is kayaking, canoeing, biking, hiking, any one of those things. And I've been on many 1 to 3 week self-propelled trips, but I've never done a long trip. And I always wanted to do a long expedition, but I didn't know what that was going to be. Fast forward 7 or 8 years ago, Elizabeth and I rented a couple kayaks and paddled over to Discovery Island.
Before we ever started kayaking.
Yeah, this is before kayaking. We rented the kayaks, went over to Discovery Island, and when we were there, 2 kayaks came into the bay, and they're all decked out in all our fancy gear, and they had nice kayaks. Lo and behold, it was Shauna and Leon from Body Boat and Blade, which is an instructional kayak company on Orcas Island in the San Juans. Well, in talking to Shauna and Leon, this was the second last night of their trip around Vancouver Island. And I looked at them all buggy-eyed. Around Vancouver Island, how is that possible? Well, within a couple of months of that time, Elizabeth and I were over on Orcas Island taking a multi-day kayak course with Shauna and Leon. Going forward a few more years, now I'm retired, and after retiring from work, I started paddling with the Wednesday and Thursday paddling groups. And within that group was Alan Campbell, Rob Zacharias, and Bob Maxwell, Dave, thanks, Dave Maxwell, who had spent several months paddling from here to Alaska a couple of years before. And as well, Rob had circumnavigated Vancouver Island. So I was a bit in awe of these guys, and they mentored me for a little while, and eventually I sort of came around to, gee, maybe going around Vancouver Island is that long trip I've been looking for. Anyway, last year Elizabeth retired from work, and I asked her, do you want to go around Vancouver Island? What do you say, Elizabeth?
And, well, I mean, I really like camping, and I love sleeping in a tent beside the ocean, and I don't mind hauling things up and down, and I just really like being in a boat on the water. And, you know, I like the simple life in your kayaking, and all you have to worry about is what's going to happen that day. And I've never been on a kayak trip that I was ready to be over. I always wish they were longer. So when Bob brought up this 2-month kayak trip, I said, oh well, why not? So anyway, here we are.
This is Marg's answer to this question that she sent us via email. She has always been attracted to wild and remote places and enjoys the seemingly uncomplicated day-to-day living when there. Her ego has given her a desire to pursue adventures, test her skills, and achieve goals. This trip challenged all those things, so when Bob mentioned a desire to do the trip, she wanted in. So
Marg and I met on we actually did our level 3 together, and then we did another course with skills together. So that's sort of where we met each other. Next. Well, you should.
What slide is this? Oh, yeah. The purpose of this slide is not to show off our experience, but it's to show that many of you have the same experience and training as we do. And if you like camping and you're interested in this, you can do it. Elizabeth and I did not feel confident in our ability and experience for surf landings, strong currents, rough water, and rescues, but in the 6 months before the trip, we took special clinics in those areas.
With all those guys.
This is a
You have to advance that one too.
I don't know what's in the notes. We used Google Earth for the initial route plan and the distance calculations and resupply locations. This photo is an early planning tracker. It's not exactly what we did.
Yeah, we originally planned we were going to go into Fair Harbor, but we vetoed that plan when we found out they didn't have a post office, because that was a critical thing for us. So.
We initially estimated it would take about 60 days to complete the trip around the island. This was based on a daily average of 15 nautical miles for paddling days, and every 4th day would be a non-paddling day, either due to weather or we needed a rest. For navigational tools, we use both hard copy and electronic toys. I made 11 by 17 photocopies of chart sections along the route to fit in a waterproof case. I just hate folding maps or charts all the time. John Abercrombie, I remember you telling me they're charts. So anyways, that involved getting all the charts, and I used this plastic plexiglass and marked off the corners and went to Staples and photocopied 11 by 17 sections.
I think it was 100 and some pages.
Yeah, there's 105 pages make up the around the island, and this is a stack of them. We also had a copy of the Canadian tide and current tables.
I'm sorry, are they on vellum or?
Pardon me?
Or you have them printed on the plexi?
No,
No.
no, he just used that so he could mark out the parts of the
You know, I
chart that
put
we
it down
wanted.
there, put a little mark on it,
Then
then when I
fold
went
it
to,
all up.
I knew how to fold it when I went to
Got it.
Staples.
It's a big production, taking all those big things into Staples.
For electronics, I feel like, something's
So Bob, those are just on ordinary paper.
Yeah, the 11 by 17
Yeah.
Staples.
Yeah.
You didn't laminate them or anything.
And so we actually had 2 copies of them, Elizabeth, so we had 2 copies in case one of them got wet or something. And practically, we only had 1 or 2 sheets out in any given day. It's something we would do at night, take the old ones out and put new ones in. For electronics, our main electronics tool was a Navigational program on our iPhone. It provides an electronic chart with iPhone GPS location. We found it very useful for navigating in fog, for determining tides and currents, and for calculating distances.
We actually never looked at the book for tides and currents, we just used Navionics.
How did you charge your phone?
I'll get to that, that's
Okay.
part of my, yeah.
Okay. So I had most of the charts on the east and south side of Vancouver Island, so I only had to purchase a couple. But I didn't have so many on the west side. So I bought this cruising atlas, and it already has pages in 11 by 17 format for all of the west coast. And they're essentially copies of official government charts. So I just took the pages out of this.
We should loan it to the library.
Yeah. Next page. For finding camping campsites and other land features, John Kamanis' 2-volume atlas and his 2 guidebooks are an invaluable resource for this trip and any trip on the BC South Coast. We took both atlases and both guidebooks and used them every day. In fact, we had readings from the Book of John every morning.
Yeah, we had our readings from Book of John.
So the actual tool, the mapping tool that we used, that we carried on a daily basis on our kayaks, were pages from the Kamanis Atlas. And this is a copy of a section of the atlas from Lund. And then from that, we added additional campsites manually from the BC Marine Trail database. So you can see on the chart here, just south of Desolation Sound, there's a triangle, MT. Triangle is a tent, MT stands for Marine Trails, and a couple other, there's a couple more up on the right. And then the other tent symbols are potential campsites.
Not all of John's campsites in there are actually on the Marine Trails campsites, right? So that, we had to put them together.
But a lot of them are, so we
Yeah.
only added the
Ones
new
that are-
ones, the extra ones. Something's wrong there. Oh, sorry, I'm thinking that's supposed to go. Okay, can you change, or everything else? So this is a section of the BC Marine Trail website map, just north of Lund, the same area. And this, again, as I said, this is where we obtained additional campsites. The campsites on this map are all the green icons. And if you drill into the green circles that have 2, then you'll get 2 campsites. So that's the Copeland Islands just under Briss Landing, and there's 2 campsites on the Copeland Islands, and we did camp on one of them. Typically what I found was that on any of the Kamanis sheets, we added 3 or 4 additional campsites. So it was just another resource or option along the way. You can also get electronic versions of this. So we downloaded campsite locations from the site onto our Garmin InReach. And we also download the campsite descriptions via a table onto our iPhone. So we have the GPS location.
iPad.
Oh yeah, iPad, right. And so we could check what kind of campsite it really was. A word of caution though, the maps lump all types of campsites as one designation. you need to go to the campsite description to see whether it's suitable for your group. So on our trip, we found that some of these so-called campsites were really just bivouac sites that maybe one tent could use. So it causes a problem in a few sites.
Yeah, so Bob did most of the route preparation things, and Marg and I did the food and equipment preparation. Well, certainly the food, Bob was part of the equipment too. And so I just put this in as a title page. That was my face when I discovered how good Nutella is in instant coffee. It makes a sort of mocha drink. We called it Nut Cruncher coffee. Anyway, we probably should have started work further ahead of time than we did getting our food ready, but we didn't. So Marg came to our house for a good 2 weeks, and we pretty much spent 2 solid weeks drying food. We chopped up all sorts of fresh and frozen fruits and vegetables and dried things. We had 2 dryers running all the time. We made some big pots of one-pot dishes. We all like fruitcake at lunchtime, so we made a big batch of fruitcake. The one-pot meals we found really the best because they were so easy at the end of the day, because we're getting up there in age, so we're always pretty tired by the end of our days. We sealed everything. We used a lot of plastic, unfortunately, but we sealed everything in vacuum sealed packages, especially the one-pot meals. We had lunches were relatively difficult. We ate a lot of cheese and peanut butter and wraps and those kinds of things. Cheese keeps for a long time on the bottom of the boat. We always had an apple at lunchtime. We shared one apple between 3 of us. We had a lot of chocolate. Breakfast was usually, we had our own version of instant oatmeal that we made. Got a little bit tired of it, but you know, it's food. We found this book, Recipes for Adventure. I got it on Amazon. And he's got lots of good ideas about food drying. There's also this website, the backpackingchef.com, and it covers almost everything in the recipe book. It was great. So this needs to catch up on. This is your job.
Sorry.
So we sent everything by mail to, we couldn't carry all our food when we left. So we made some inquiries about how to send things and found that Canada Post was really relatively reasonable. It was about $20 to send the box. So we had 2 big boxes that we sent up to Port Mcneil and another 2 boxes to Winter Harbor. That's the only place on the west coast apart from Tofino that has a post office. So we just sent it to general delivery. They'll hold your stuff there for 2 weeks. Probably if you put a little note, we're not sure of our arrival date, you know, they might hold it longer. Our daughter, Cassandra, we left them all packaged up, and we texted her when it was time for her to send it, and she took it down and mailed it.
Jazz apples.
Oh yeah, jazz apples. They keep really well. We filled up our box with the tops of the boxes to Winter Harbor with jazz apples, and they sat there in our basement for about a month before she sent them off, or a few weeks anyway, and they were jazz apples and carrots. Keep really well.
We had a marine radio sent to us because one of ours stopped working, and I didn't take enough clothes on the first leg. It was unusually cold in June, and I was thinking summer. And anyways, for the first couple of weeks, I was pretty cool.
So Canada Post is very helpful for these trips. We did a lot of kayak and equipment preparation. Bob wants to talk about that?
Okay. So this is a picture of me. I changed the rudder controls on my Telqua and Elizabeth's Titan VI from sliders to gas pedals. These are a lot better for efficient paddling because you've got a solid peg to brace on when you're paddling. Our tent was a 10-year-old MSR Hubba Hubba, and it needs some tender loving care, so I waterproofed the floor, and we purchased a new fly because we didn't trust it. Had a repair kit that included materials to repair our tents, tarps, and kayaks. It was easy to get spare hardware for the kayaks because they were all manufactured on Vancouver Island. We started the trip with 3 tarps, and we ended up shipping one home because we found that we didn't actually use tarps all that often.
Is this where you want the props? These are
Oh,
two
yeah.
things we brought.
Yeah.
We found these things are really, really handy. You can tie these around your tent. They're little MSR. We call them tent bras. You can put a rock in them, and they work really well on rocky ground. And these big pegs from MEC hold really well in sand.
They intend to
so-
be snow,
I think they're supposed to be for snow.
Snow pegs,
They're $2.
but they work great
Yeah.
in sand. Free tip there, folks. Marg's tent was
In spite
fairly,
of all our
was a
preparations.
fairly new MSR two-person Alexa, and even with good preparation, damage can occur. And she actually broke 4 poles. One of the poles went through the tent, and she had a new tent sent to her in Tofino, but for days, she almost had to remake the tent every night. It was a bit much.
So we ended up keeping our kitchen equipment pretty much to a minimum. We ended up sending a bunch of things home from Port Mcneil that we weren't using. We really only needed 2 pots. We had a kettle. We each had a bowl. We did away with the plates. We did away with the fry pan. We did away with another pot. We each had 1 mug. We each had 1 water bottle, plus our things on our backs. We had a kitchen sink. MEC has a really good hot cozy thing that we really liked. It's about $10. You can warm up your pasta sauce in it and put it in the pot cozy and go off and do something and come back and it's all rehydrated. So that was pretty much the kitchen. We got it down to pretty simple.
I switched over to isobutane stoves a year or so ago, and we had 2 Covia butane stoves. One of them was fairly beefy, and the other was sort of like a pocket rocket one. It was just a backup one. And Marg had an alcohol stove that we ended up shipping back because we felt we had more than enough. And just on the canister point, we only took canisters from for each leg, and well, certainly from in Port Mcneil, I had made arrangements to buy another set of canisters that would do us to Tofino. So that worked pretty good. And it was the same price as an MEC.
I just put this in because I like those pictures of Marg and the spoon. We had a problem with the spoons. Bob was a dedicated dishwasher, and somehow we kept losing our big spoon. So every time we had the opportunity, we had to buy another big spoon.
I was the chief dishwasher.
Chief dishwasher, yeah.
Good.
For water, we carried MSR dromedaries. We had a total of 57 liters in them, which generally lasted us quite a while. We had this Rapid Pure, what is this thing?
What do you want?
There, a Rapid Pure. This is a water filter that we really liked. You just fill it up and hang it from a tree or hold it up, and the water flows through at about 4 liters a minute. It removes everything. It was great. The one little thing that happened was it sort of slowed down halfway through the trip, and we couldn't really figure it out. We had to just leave it up there for a long time. Anyway, I found out after I got home that all you have to do is suck on the thing and it gets rid of whatever airlock was going on, and it flowed like anything again. But we were smart enough to figure that out on the trip.
So we used about 10 liters of water a day between all 3 of us. So one of those 10-liter dromedary bags a day.
And here's the electronics. I had lots of things. Much as I say I like the simple life, you know, I have to have all the toys too. So we each had a camera. Mine's a waterproof camera, so most of these pictures were taken with my Olympus camera. We all had an iPhone. I took my iPad along. That's where I like to do my trip notes on the iPad, that way I don't lose it. We both had e-readers. I have this InReach, that's this thing here. So that was what linked to Facebook, and it also links to the phone, so you can do your typing on your phone, not on the little dial thing. We had rechargeable headlamps. We all had our VHF radios. Mine is recharges with a USB. So to recharge all of these things, we carried those power banks. So I had a total of 70,000, so it was about 5 or 6 different sized little things that you get. Marg had a solar charger with us that we never used and ended up sending back from Port Mcneil. So even with all those electronics, with the little bag of the power packs, that kept us going. It would have kept us going for probably 4 weeks. So yeah, it's the easiest way to go. There's not a lot of sunshine always here that we can count on charging things with our solar things. So a 20,000 one, it's about this big, that wide round, this thick. They're $30 to $40 on Amazon, and that'll charge an iPhone 6 or 8 times. Probably depends on the iPhone.
Just want to make a couple comments about the inReach. I found the inReach an invaluable tool. It was just like magic to be able to text our family or whoever to get stuff sent to us, or just keep in touch. So it had text capability through a satellite as well. There was the mapping function that if you went to our Facebook or another site, you could see where we were on the map. And then it had the SOS feature, sending out an emergency if we push that button. And you always wonder whether those work. But when we were in Winter Harbor, during the day, one day when we were there, someone accidentally set off one of the fishermen set off their inReach. And the guy in the next campsite, he went out in the boat to go look for him, and he was in contact with the search and rescue folks, and they asked him to do that. And it just happened that there was an aircraft in the air, so there was an aircraft searching for these guys as well. They didn't even know that people were looking for them, and the searchers couldn't figure out why the location kept changing. And it's just that they were fishing, and so they were
So it's
pretty
nice to know the
sheepish.
SOS works.
Yeah. So the new version of inReach makes it harder for them to have.
And then we did the old packing thing, you know, to lay down everything, is it gonna fit? And we were all very happy when it did. Yeah, you can talk about group dynamics.
Okay, before the trip, we had the goal of paddling for 60 days and hoping to make it around the island. We had an understanding that we would stay on the beach if anyone felt that the conditions, or they didn't have the energy, weren't good for us to paddle that day, and so we followed that. We agreed on a general start time and an average distance per day. Things evolved as the trip progressed. This usually happened over coffee in the morning, seemed to be our best time. Marg liked to have a destination campsite picked out ahead of time, whereas our practice was a little different in that we just like to have a bunch of campsites, and whatever one we made it to, that's what we picked. So we sort of reached a happy medium of those two concepts. We found that we paddled better in difficult conditions when one person was designated the pacer. So when we're in fog or crossings or wind or an area of lots of boats, then one person was a pacer, and it was the other two people's job to keep close.
And I'm the
to that
bossiest,
person.
so I usually got to be the pacer.
Yeah, I noticed, yeah.
You didn't notice, eh?
Things were better when we had a defined evening and morning meeting to plan for the day ahead. Our ideal planning routine was after dinner, we reviewed the day's paddle for learnings. And then we developed the next day's paddling plan based on looking at the weather reports, the charts, the campsite maps we talked about, the Book of John, people's energy levels, and upcoming milestones such as towns and capes and peninsulas and crossings. Okay, next page. Oh, I didn't turn that page. In the morning, we would review the updated weather and our energy levels and make a decision on whether to go that day. This was the morning discussion after a particularly difficult day when we were all pretty tired. And as you can see, I didn't get the memo not to smile.
You're supposed to be tired and grumpy.
We also found that we needed to be honest about our feelings and energy levels during these meetings. Well, that's all.
Marg comes from a mountaineering background, and what she mostly did with guys, and you can never say when you're with a group of guys that you're tired, right? Or that you couldn't keep up, and so she would never tell us when she was tired. But it took us a while to figure that out. So once we did, things were better.
Just in that vein, we found for us, if we went over 20 nautical miles in a day, or maybe less, but it was a hard day, then we started getting grumpy that night and the next day. So then we would have to take a rest day.
There's a few grumpy days.
So knowing the weather is critical to kayakers, and one of the things that we really paid attention to on the trip was when not to paddle. So for weather forecast, we used the Environment Canada marine weather report on our radios. We used our iPhone when we were in cell coverage. We used Predict Wind on our iPhone when we had cell coverage. And my daughter sent us InReach,
Yeah, she sent us
Predict Wind forecast through the InReach when we asked her. And we appreciated Rob Zacharias on the West Coast sending us weather reports through the InReach as well. I think he was reliving his trip for a while there. We also had a weather program called Dark Sky that we could get from the Garmin InReach. So we did actually have a fair amount of weather information.
Planning for illness and injury, given probably most people know I'm an almost retired family doctor, so I travel with a fairly extensive first aid kit. So I've got a suture kit and drugs for various conditions and antibiotics for various conditions. And it did come in handy at one point. Marg actually was really sick for a couple of days on the West Coast Trail on the west coast of the island. She had a partial small bowel obstruction, which she has had before, but she was pretty sick for a couple of days. I think a lot of people would have wanted to go out, but she's pretty tough, so she toughed it out, and I had some drugs that helped her along for a couple of days. It took her a full week to get better, though. And Bob has had back issues for half of his life, and it seemed to flare in the month or two before he went away, so we left loaded with all sorts of muscle relaxants and Tylenol and Advil and all those things, but fortunately he discovered this stretch that seemed to completely stop his back from seizing up.
It was magic. I had a bag of every kind of painkiller you could think of like that. And I took one Advil or two Advil one day, and it didn't make any difference.
They got sent home from Port Mcneil.
So I sent them home.
So I took a lot of these pictures,
This
hoping
was
that
like-
one day I would get one when he went over, but he never did.
This was magic for me.
We also had to plan for things to do because we knew there'd be some down days like this one, so we all had our journals to write in and books to read. Marg sings a lot, and she managed to fit a ukulele into her boat.
Great.
Yeah, so we always knew when Marg was stressed if she wasn't singing or playing her ukulele. And I like to knit, so we took along some knitting and taught Marg how to knit socks. And did lots of that.
This is this map is our actual track of our trip, and the blue rectangles are campsite locations. This was done with the InReach mapping software that we had on our website, and the blue rectangles are actually the location of text messages that we sent to Facebook each night. We couldn't carry all our gear, and for logistical reasons, for that and logistical reasons, we divided the trip into 4 sections. The first section was from Victoria up to Port Mcneil, and this was the longest stretch by quite a bit, the longest leg. And we carried about 4 weeks. We figured it would take us about 3 weeks to do that stretch, and we carried close to 4 weeks of gear, of food. But it was the least remote portion of the trip, and then we had lots of opportunities that we could stop to get more supplies if we needed it. The second leg was from Port Mcneil to Winter Harbor, and it was the shortest by quite a bit.
And that was dictated by the post office.
Yeah, it was the first post office after Port Hardy. And it was also a good psychological place to rest after, you know, we were anticipating the North Coast, and so it was good to have a couple of days to just hang out in Winter Harbor. The next leg was from Winter Harbor to Tofino, and it was very fortuitous that Tofino is almost halfway to Victoria, so the last leg was Tofino to Victoria. Well, we've got time for.
Is there any questions on this section before we move on to showing more pictures?
Just a quick
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
How long did you paddle per day on an average basis?
It ended up our average was 15 nautical miles a day. So some days the shortest, and I have a little table when we do it, the shortest was maybe 5 or 6 miles, and the longest was up to 20. But the average for the trip was 15, and we pretty much paddled at 3 nautical miles an hour. So that was usually about 5 hours of paddling would be the average. We were really consistent with our 3 miles an hour.
So, I mean, if we were going with the tide, it might be
Current.
with the current, it might be 3.2 or 3.3, and if we were against the current, it might be 2.6 knots, that sort of thing. But, so if it was 5 hours of paddling, it might be 6 hours, a bit more in actual travel time. You know, we stopped for lunch, stopped to take some pictures, that sort of thing.
So why did you pick west side of Texada and going up that side of the Sailor Sea instead of the east side of Vancouver Island, Denman?
I'll come to that, that's in the next section.
It's good
Perfect.
talking
Okay,
about that,
yeah. So, the next section, we're gonna talk about.
Another question?
That was the pie on Texada, right?
That was one of the reasons, yes, it was the pie.
I thought the anticipation, in actual fact, the anticipation was better than the pie. Sorry to say. Any other questions on preparation and planning? Okay.
You can always ask later.
Bob and Elizabeth, how successful was vacuum packing, which makes the package really stiff
Yeah, it worked really well.
versus using Ziploc bags?
Well, we did it because a lot of the food was going to, it was going to be prepared for 2 months, right? So we just thought, okay, that'll help preserve it.
Yeah.
It worked well. Yeah, we didn't have any problems with it. It was nice to have everything together. Like what he does in his book, some of the things we put in a Ziploc bag and then vacuum pack them all together if we wanted separate kind of things. That's what he shows how to do in the book. Yeah.
So for
The other thing, pardon me?
packing though, when it's vacuum packed,
Yeah.
it's rigid,
Yes.
as opposed to, I
Well,
can
we just-
understand where you're doing a long trip, but
Yeah.
for shorter trips, just for people to know,
Yeah.
using Ziploc bags works fine.
It does. The other thing that works really well that we used a lot of was the bags that you buy your frozen fruits and vegetables in. They're really stiff and they don't get holes in them the way Ziploc bags do. So I save all those, and even, we would put other small bags inside of those big things that you get from Costco with the frozen fruit.
Elizabeth, did you
Yeah.
do anything about bear barrels or?
No,
were
we
you
didn't.
bears at all?
No, we just put everything in our hatches, and we didn't see a
We didn't see
bear. We did not see one bear, not one.
We
saw
saw
prints.
a few footprints, but that was it.
Yeah, but no bears, no wolves, a few whales.
Okay. The second half of the presentation will show some maps, photographs, and numerical summary of each leg of the trip. Each leg of the trip has, and we'll be focusing on the challenges that happen along the way.
Okay.
All right.
Well, is this one, you have to change that one.
Okay, I
Change that one.
Okay. This is a detailed, more detailed map, the same map, but just more blown up, of the first portion of leg 1. And our route was basically from Island View to Prevost to Blackberry Point, all these places we've been, to Newcastle Island and Southie Island, and then over to the Sweetie and Texada. And to answer Norm's question, we decided to cross over here. One, we had never been to Texada and Musqueam, and we wanted to go there, and we tried to go there last year, and it was too windy. And the second reason is we had chosen, you'll see further along, we took the most easterly route through the myriad of channels north of Cortez Island, and so that would set us up for that.
To avoid Johnstone Strait?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and all the traffic and wind and those things.
So, and from there, we went up Texada, the west side of Texada, and camped at a commercial campsite here.
And that was because of the pie.
Shelter Cove, because of pie, exactly, and we camped on the north end of Texada, and then over to Lund, and camped at Copeland Island.
No, I get it.
Do you get it?
No, I get it.
There's
Show
a
some
couple more
pictures.
things I wanted to say. Shoot, I lost it now.
Bob, it's okay. You said no.
Okay.
So here we are, all ready to go, all packed up, and it was a beautiful day. We first stopped, this was actually on the second day, the weather switched, it was a rainy day. That's Marg paddling up outside Valdez Island. And, you know, I just never cease to be amazed by those spectacular cliffs on the north end of Valdez and the nesting cormorants. This is a picture from Bob's camera that's got a good zoom on it. And we continued up further north, and here's our kayaks. We were going through the cut there between Lincoln and DeCourcy Islands. So we got there a little bit before we had to wait for the tide to come up. But I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about our kayaks. We're all new to us for this trip. I got my one in the middle is the Titan VI from Atlantis Kayaks. And I got it from, yeah, it's a great boat, and I was really happy with it. Previously, we've only had Skags, but I loved having a rudder on the trip, and especially on the west coast. It performed really well in following seas. It just kept going where it wanted, and I just paddled along, and no stroke correction or anything. It was great. Bob had
How long was the kayak?
it's 17 foot. I think
It's almost
17.
18, I think.
17 and a half, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of volume of stuff it can hold, it was the smallest of the three. Bob's is the green one. Oops, look, I'm pushing. There, yeah. Well, it's hitting the wrong button here. Bob's is the green one, and that's the Nimbus Telqua, and it's a real gear hauler. It didn't perform as well in following seas as mine did. He would be doing this, and I'd just be paddling along. And Marg got a brand new Seaward Guide boat. And hers has a skag in it, and it's sort of underneath your seat, and it has the same problem as those other boats. It was always getting jammed. So, you know, we had the technique. She'd lean over one boat, so we'd have to get out at night and pull out the stuff. So anyway, she liked it, but it wasn't. Likewise, she was doing a lot of this in following seas. And that's a selfie again, sitting at a lunch break at
I think it's the same
DeCourcy
spot.
Island. Yeah, it's the same spot. Let me get one so I don't need a pointer. And we had our first rest day at Newcastle Island, whether we needed it or not. And it's a nice place to clean up and rest and charge your batteries. And then that's just another little bit of a close-up view of the campsite going across of the route from Newcastle Island. We stayed at Southie Island. The Marine Trails has a campsite here at Gerald Island, but it was too windy and the Sea Stars didn't like paddling into the wind, so we stopped early. So there's a 4-mile crossing here from Bolinas Island across. We paddled out to Bolinas Island, and it was really windy, and I hung out for a while and paddled around the island and almost ended up camping there, but the wind went down, and we eventually were able to cross, and that's Marg in the middle of Georgia Strait. And that's a happy faces that we finally got across Georgia Strait intact. And
You probably all know that it's hard to get pictures of the really tense
yeah,
area.
yeah.
So where there's no pictures, it was probably pretty tense.
Yeah. We spent the night on Lasqueti Island. It was pouring rain, and fortunately Marg had a friend there that had a cabin, and we got to stay in the cabin, which was nice. And then this is the next day paddling out and through Jedediah, and that's going towards Texada. And we didn't often have tailwinds, but all the way down Texada we had a tailwind, which was great. So this is Marg going downwind along Texada. And this is at the Pie Campground. It's a municipal campground at Shelter Cove.
Yeah.
And
Shelter Point.
yeah, it's a really
Is it
good
Shelter
campsite.
Point?
Shelter Point.
Shelter Point?
One of the best campgrounds ever, because it doesn't matter where the wind's coming from, there's
Right.
always one side you can get out of the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. One of the things I just wanted to mention too, see the socks and things drying. Another little tip, you know, those bread bag clips work really well as clothes pegs, and they don't take up very much room. And this was Bob when he was cold. He forgot to take them, well, he thought it was supposed to be summer, so he didn't have that any clothes with him, but anyway, he got warmed up again when he got to Port Mcneil. And the north end of Texada is, it was actually pretty challenging. We had the wind again behind us, 10 to 15 knots or so, and there's quite a few cliffs and not really anywhere to pull out. And it was sporty paddling. That's Marg's favorite word, is sporty.
You took a picture when the wave was coming right
I
over
know.
your bow?
I know. Yeah, that was a brave moment.
Yeah.
And this is a campsite on the north end of Texada Island at Grills Bay. We're looking over there across towards the mill over at Powell River. That's the Blubber Bay ferry terminal. Ferry going by,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah. And, you know, the next morning there was white caps and wind, and sea stars don't paddle when it's like that, so we got another day there.
So this is a north wind coming
Yeah, it was
right
straight
at
at
us,
us,
so we
so-
would have had to go that
It
direction.
was over 10 knots, I think. There's the Blubber Bay ferry going by in the evening. And there's our boat still waiting that night for the wind to settle down, which it did the next morning. So the next day we were able to get underway again, and we had a great day paddling over towards Lund, and we stopped in Lund for dinner and then paddled out to the Copeland Islands to this beautiful campsite for the night. Bob wants to talk, so this is the...
This map shows our track on the second portion of the first leg. So starting down at Copeland Islands, and then this was in Con Channel, or the north end.
Lewis Channel.
Lewis Channel, that's correct. And then Stewart Islands, and then through the rapid area to Welborn Channel, and we went Sutherland Channel to get over to Johnson Strait, and this was our first campsite on Johnson Strait, and Little Blenkinsop Bay, and then behind Beg Island, and then carried up Johnson Strait to Alder Point and Port Mcneil.
So that was the route that kept us out of Johnston Strait for the longest period of time.
I just want to talk about the challenging areas. Challenging areas we planned for in this area is the rapid area, which I'll talk about in a minute. Challenging areas not anticipated was finding, we couldn't find a campsite at Green Point Rapids, which we were planning on staying at, and this resulted in the longest day of our trip. We had a high tide flood our campsite on West Craycroft Island by Beg Islet, and we had a really long day going from there to Alder Bay. It was
In the
again,
pouring rain.
In the pouring rain, again, it was 21 nautical miles.
Did you find that people were staying at places that you, like, were already there when you tried to camp, or
No,
there not many people out
We
there?
didn't see
No.
anybody.
Nobody.
Nobody.
On the
There
last
was nobody
slide-
when we were in the Copeland Islands. Yeah, we had that campsite to ourselves,
Wow.
like,
And
we
this is
didn't see.
June, right? June?
It might have been July by then.
July.
It was July by then. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
On the last slide, you'll,
Yeah, I have a
we have a bunch of
statistic of-
interesting statistics, and I think it's 9 people.
Nine
or
other
9 other
kayakers.
groups, but several of those groups were only 1 or 2 people that we saw on the whole time. And
Apart from when we were camped at a commercial campsite.
Yeah.
And anyways, there's also the number of campsites that was someone else at is really small as well, like 3 or 4. So this was an interesting long day paddling from Stewart Island to, well, off this chart, off this map. But this area in general reminded me of paddling, of river paddling with channels and eddies, except that the current changes direction every 6 hours. This slide is two maps from the Camanus Atlas, and the Book of John told us that we should go through these rapids as close to slack tide as we could. So we were camped. We were camped at a old log dump here on the south end of Stewart Island, and we left such that the water was still. This is the Yakolta Rapids. This is Gillard Passage, which is rapidy, and this is Dent Rapids here. And so it was getting near the end of the flood, ready to turn when we started paddling up here. So we were paddling against the current and eddy hopping on channel right, and then we ferried over to Sonora Island, and then went around into Innis Channel, which only small boats can go through there to avoid Gillard Passage. And then somewhere around here the tide changed and we started flowing pretty quickly, and we sailed right through Dent Rapids by Dent Island and carried on down Cordora Channel. And later in the day, we were coming this way. Later in the day, we were approaching Green Point Rapids, and the plan was to stop at one of these campsites, either these two or this one. Coming here, we didn't even go in there. There's two on the shore, and we knew we'd have to walk a long way. We spent about an hour checking out these two sites and a couple of other sites in here, and we couldn't find anywhere to put our tent. So the tide was, or the current was about to change, and it was slack in the rapids. We decided we better go through. The rain had just started again, so we went through here and we paddled against the current for another 5 kilometers to this campsite here, which was a good campsite. But at the end of the day, this turned out to be our longest day of 24 nautical miles, and was also our latest campsite. We got in at 8 o'clock. So it was what it was.
And there we are, setting off, heading up towards Yakolta Rapids, and I'm always the nervous one, so I'm at the back, right, waiting to see what happens to these guys. But you know, with our good planning, not much happened. I'm in the middle of the rapids taking pictures, so I mean, it was all fine. That's looking down Yakolta Rapids, and that's looking up the rapids. The water was moving, but it was very uneventful. And Marg and I are going to go back and stay here sometime. This fantastic lodge it's a fishing lodge on Sonora Island.
That's high-end.
Yeah, it's very high-end. That would be a real glamping trip. The helicopters were coming and going.
Yeah, could someone arrange
Yeah,
a trip
glamping
out
trip
of this
here.
lodge, please?
It's a very beautiful area. And I guess there's so many seals there because the fishermen are all cleaning their fish and throwing out their heads. So this big group of seals followed us, and we were a little nervous because we'd heard about the Broughton incident, you know, but fortunately these were all friendly guys. And this is going on through Innis Passage, so you can see we're still going a little bit with the flood, and there we are, that's Bob heading down through Dent Rapids, which is right there by the marker. And so we paddled all the next day. I don't have pictures of it, but this is our first campsite at Little Blenkinsop Bay on Johnson Strait. And the point of this was to remind people of the long carries that you sometimes end up with on these trips. You know, this was a long carry, but fortunately it was actually fairly smooth, so it wasn't difficult.
So from a camping point of view, a steep beach
Short, steep beach is good.
is good.
But anyway, they're not all that way. Get what you get. And the tides, you know, vary from day to day too, so. And that's just a picture of fog on Johnston Strait. And there we are the next day paddling into I think this might have even been our first foggy day. Yeah. But the good thing is that if there's fog on Johnston Strait, there's probably not much wind. So we didn't have much wind. But we got rain later, and this was our campsite, the next one on Johnston Strait, and it had all this built-in clotheslines, and the sun came out for an hour or so, and things to dry off a bit, so it was great. Until about 10 o'clock at night, when the tide came in, we realized it wasn't quite so good, so we tried to shore it up, but that wasn't working, so we had to put the tent up on the logs for an hour or two and wait for the tide to go back down again before we could go to bed. And then the next day was a long day's paddle into Alder Bay, and again it was pouring rain when we got there. The picture of the tents is actually the next day, but we were actually saved by Lata, this very nice lady that has a food truck there, and it's covered, and it was dry, and we had great fish and chips, and that's actually, we ran into Marg, who was also camping there, so we had a nice visit with Barb that night, the next morning. And then the next stop was Port Mcneil, and this was we phoned ahead to the marina at Port Mcneil. It's a private marina, and Alan is the fellow that owns it. There's two there. There's a government one and the private one, and he runs the private one, and it's got the gas tank if you're ever in there. That's where all the boats go to get gas. And he was really helpful, and he let us store our boats there. We put them up on the floats for a few days, but the day before we were leaving, we put them back in the water and had them partially loaded. We stayed at the Dalewood Motel, which is just up the hill from the water. There's actually cell reception for a couple of days before you get to Port Mcneil, so I could just phone and make a reservation, so that was pretty handy. And we took a taxi to get all our gear up to the hotel, and there's an excellent restaurant in there, so we ate out for a few days. And yeah, so we planned 2 nights there, but then the northwest wind came up, so we got an extra day, which was pretty nice. Didn't mind staying in the hotel. On one of the days, we went over to Swantula, and they've got some free bikes, and you can ride your bikes around the island, and that was pretty fun. So that was a change from paddling.
We found Port Mcneil a great community to resupply. For example, the marine supply store had easily as much stuff as what we have here in Victoria. The sports store had, surprise, surprise, I had lost my knife, and I was able to buy the same
No, Bob
paddling
never
knife.
loses anything.
The fuel canisters, I bought some shoes. It was great shopping anyway.
Shoes.
Highly recommend
I bought
that.
shoes too. New Crocs.
New Crocs, yeah.
Crocs are getting
$80 Crocs. Yeah, they were fancy.
So this is, oops, I always hit the button at the same time. So this is our leg one summary. That took us 15 days of paddling to get to Port Mcneil. We had 6 rest days, 243, so that was our average per day, was 16.2. So I guess it was 5 to 6 hours a day we were paddling most days on that trip. Some days were longer. We got half an hour, Bob. So keep it moving.
For this track, we left Port Mcneil, going north to Hardy Bay, and the first campsite was on the west side of Hardy Bay. And then we went up to Galitas Channel to what we called Last Chance Waterfall Camp. And it was just near Solomon
It wasn't
Creek.
marked, and we stopped for lunch at this beach, and then the wind came up. So Galitas Channel is known for not having a lot of options for camping, so we figured we were at a good beach, we'd just stay.
It was a great spot.
It was a great spot.
Then we carried on up Galitas Channel, around Jepner Point, and camped at Cape Pseudo. Elizabeth will talk about what happened here in a minute. And then we carried on towards Cape Scott, camping at Neeson Bight, and then experimental bight right at Cape Scott. And around Cape Scott to Helen Island at the mouth of St. Joseph Bay, and south with a tailwind down to Grant Bay and into Winter Harbor.
So this was the campsite that we stopped at in Galitas Channel, what we called Last Chance Waterfall. So again, that shows, well, that's high tide there, and that's low tide, so another long carry, but slightly rockier, so these are the things that we encounter on a long trip. And that was our that's the waterfall, Last Chance Waterfall campsite, so it was pretty nice, big pool down at the bottom.
Campsites are really limited along that
Yeah.
stretch of the coast, so it's great when you do find them.
So we actually ended up with another day there because of wind, so when we eventually got underway, the next little spot, this is to talk about Tatino Reef, which we did not pay enough attention to. Marg and I had both been on a trip here with Kate Hives and had paddled past Tatino Reef, and she didn't talk about it. And, you know, there's all that white water there, so you read the Book of John and you think, oh, well, we'll just, you know, stay close to shore, go in that white water and all's good, so we didn't pay any attention. Anyway, we had lunch at Jepther Point, which is, oh, I keep hitting it. Jepther Point over there, and then we sort of paddled along, we're going along, and I think it was around here somewhere, the water was getting rather sporty, and there was some wind going on, and so we're paddling along, and ahead of us we could see this flat, calm water where you think, oh, things are going to get better, so you paddle along and you get there, and then you're just paddling along, paddling along. It wasn't until we actually looked at the shore and went, oh, we're not actually going anywhere. Like, you knew there was a bit of current, but it was like the whole ocean was moving, and it was smooth, but it was going at a good clip. We could not make any progress. We went out, we went in, and so we eventually decided to go into shore, which maybe that was sort of we got a little bit separated by then, so we're yelling, go to shore, go to shore. So we go to shore. Maybe it wasn't the best thing to do because there was this nice dumping surf on a very steep beach that caused a bit of problems with the landing. But we survived, and the dumping wave doesn't look very bad here. There is a dumping wave, and neither of us had pulled our we wore dry suits most of the time, but neither of us had our rubbers over our neck that day because it was such a nice day, so we both got the wave down our neck and got wet. But anyway, we pulled out there. We had to wait about 3 hours for the water to settle down enough to actually make any forward progress. The better choice might have been to go back down and around that point and just wait it out, but anyway. It all was good, and the funny thing was when I talked to Kate about it after the trip, I said, oh, Tatino Reef, you didn't talk about that. She said, oh yeah, I had it all planned. Exactly the same thing happened to her when Kate and Costain did their first trip there. They got hung up at Tatino Reef, and she said, and did you have to land in the dumping wave? So, you know, everybody, it happens. So pay attention to Tatino Reef if you're going that direction.
So what was happening? You were fighting the current?
Yes, it's a big current. Everything that's going down the whole west coast, the north coast of the island was moving.
So you need to be there on a nav.
You need to be there on
I think the current gets faster because of the reef, basically.
Yeah.
And
So we were there on a flat.
And it pushes the water closer to shore, I think, too.
Yes.
So it felt like being in a river. And
Yeah.
so we could have turned around and actually gone with it, but we didn't think of that.
But what was really funny was we were all just paddling along, not knowing that we weren't making any progress until you looked at the shore, because like it was just like you couldn't hardly tell it was current.
Yeah.
It was funny. And that's our campsite at Cape Soudal. And we spent an extra day there so that we could go for a walk along the North Coast Trail for a couple kilometers, and then came back along the beach. It was a low tide, so we were able to walk through this big split in the rock on the cape. And from there we went around. Cape Soudal was not a problem for us. It was a nice day. And this is the campsite. All those beaches along the north coast are called bites. So we went by several bites without stopping, but this was Nissan Bite. And that's the view from the campsite, the tent in Nissan Bite. And the next day was just a short paddle to Experiment Bite. And this is the closest beach to the Cape Scott and to go to the lighthouse. So we got there by lunchtime. We'd organized that so then we could spend the next afternoon going up to the lighthouse. And this is on the trail on the way up to the lighthouse. And that's the Bobby and the Sea Stars at the Cape Scott Lighthouse. The interesting thing here is this wind chime, which is made by the lighthouse keepers. And that's one of their critical things for telling us what the wind speed is. You know, we're expecting all these technological things going on, but they use that. They use the Canadian flag that's behind us and flapping. So those are the main things that they use they'll walk out, well, if the flag is flapping, it must be 10 knots. if the wind chimes are just making a little bit of noise, it's 7 knots. If they're making lots of noise, it's 15 knots. They've got this big ball that sits on some kind of stand, and if it gets blown off, it's 30 knots. So, we were really surprised. And here's Bob. So this is the lighthouse keeper. So Bob's got this anemometer thing, right? And there wasn't really any wind, but the flag was flapping. So the lighthouse keeper goes, well, the wind's 10 knots. And Bob's got his thing that says it's like 2 or 3 knots. So
I was very disheartened about this because all along the north coast there, we're really monitoring the weather because we're worried about the northwest winds. And, you know, the forecast is like 20 to 25 from the northwest, 15 to 20 from the northwest, but it never really got to there. So you keep moving along, trying to deal as far as you can. And I always relied on the lighthouse reporting of what the actual wind is. And it was just, so when we went around Cape Scott, I didn't care what the forecast was. I wanted to know what the lightkeeper was going to tell me the actual wind was. So that was out the window.
And the sea state, this is how they assess the sea state from up there. They listen and hear how loud the waves are crashing a mile away down below. Anyway, it was very interesting. So we got up the next morning. We were planning to round Cape Scott again at the beginning of an ebb. So we got up and there was a lot of whitecaps, and the sea stars don't do that. So we were staying, but there was this couple there from New Zealand, and this was a kayak that they had brought with them. They had just circumnavigated the Charlottes. Then they took the ferry down to Port Hardy. They were going from Port Hardy down to Port Alberni. This kayak breaks down into 4 pieces. They weren't wearing dry suits. I mean, these waves are crashing. So he was hanging on to the boat with her in there for probably about 10 minutes, waiting, I guess, for the waves to settle down before he got in. But he was soaked. And anyway, they eventually got underway. So, pardon me?
The cockpits were full of water.
Cockpits were full of water. He was pumping away. Anyway, the sea stars didn't paddle in. It was too much for us. So we walked over. So it's Cape Scott. There's a grassy isthmus that goes across. So this is the south-facing beach. So we walked over there to the south-facing beach called Geis Bay, and we could see them flying by in the distance. They had sails on their kayak too, and they were just moving.
They had 2 sails on the kayak.
They're quite a couple, and a group from here ran into them further south a couple of days later. Yeah.
We saw them in Kayak.
Yeah, Kayak. And then we walked back across through the beautiful meadows back over towards Experiment Bight again. And when we got there, the sea state had settled, so we decided, well, we're going to go for the end of the ebb. So we hopped in our boats and off we went. And this is Marg. So that's Cape Scott there, that, you know, sort of just that point there past the island. So this is the last picture for this day, because once we got out there, it was again pretty sporty paddling. There was lots of chop and swell and stuff going on, and we were chased by sea lions. Was the last thing I needed. Anyway, there's no more pictures. So then we went around, and so we got around Cape Scott, and we just kept on going. And when we were going, we weren't sure if we were going to go back into Geis Bay or keep on going. You can go around and camp in Geis Bay, but we got out there, and the going was good. So we continued on. There's another cape called Cape Russell that when we were there before actually gave us more problems than Cape Scott, so I was pretty thankful that Cape Russell was fine. And we camped at Helen Islands, and then this was the following day, leaving Helen Islands. And it was actually about this point that the sea stars realized that we had to quit our dawdling if we were ever going to get anywhere, so we had a really long day. And this is a difficult stretch of coast south from there. There's lots of surf. There's a few beaches that you can stop at. Patty and Eve had given us some advice about where to stop, but they were all surf landings, and the sea stars vetoed that. So we had lunch in our boats. That was the first day. It was a beautiful paddle, though. But the wind was at our backs, and there was quite big surf. So there's that fog bank out there. Bob's head paddling along. And so when we got to this beautiful, so you go past Top Knot and all these other places that you hear about. We didn't see any of them. They were kind of inshore. This is Bob relaxing at the bar at Grant Bay. It's a beautiful day. We were really happy to get there because the wind came up after our lunch. And it was and that was the campsite. There's a road that goes to within about a mile or so of here, so obviously some people come in sometimes with chainsaws and make these fancy structures, but we didn't mind. And then the next day, this is the entrance to Tatino Sound. We're heading to Winter Harbor. And we stayed at the Winter Harbor Marina and RV Park, and the couple that run that, Patty and Mike, are really helpful. I had phoned and talked to her to find out what kind of facilities were available and what can you buy. Well, not much. And, you know, talk to the lady at the post office, please, in case we don't get there within our 2 weeks. Can she please not send our boxes back? We are coming. That was our campsite. That's what resupply day looks like. We were really lucky to have nice weather because everything was just spread out. Our boxes were there waiting for us, so we got all our food reorganized, and we actually had more food than we needed at that point, so we sent some boxes on ahead to Tofino. There's a laundromat there, and there's showers there, and there's another food truck called Be More Pacific, and they had really good fish burgers. And there was lots of, most of the people that camped here are fishermen, and they were catching lots of fish, as you can see. The biggest problem was the fishermen get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're really noisy. So we don't do that. And so our rest days, we didn't actually get much sleep. So that's our summary from leg 2. It was 8 paddling days, 3 rest days, including our day off at Winter Harbor. 13 miles a day, so we weren't paddling quite as much on the north coast just because there was so many lovely things to see. Yeah, yeah.
So on this is the first part of the third leg. We left Winter Harbor across Tatino Sound, and we camped at Restless Bite, and we went around Lawn Point area. Can't remember the name of this area. Over to Heater Point, and then through Brooks Bay to Crabapple Island, which is the normal sort of staging area for around Brooks, and we went around Cape Cook and the rest of the Brooks, and we camped on the last beach just before Jacobson Point. Then we went through the Bunsbees and camped on Spring Island and carried on to Capella Island in the Chatelains.
Yeah, it was at this point we really realized that, you know, we've got to keep paddling if we're actually going to make it. Like, it's sort of a shame to paddle through those areas so quickly, but, you know, that's what happens. So this was our first campsite after leaving Winter Harbor at Restless Bite. It was a beautiful place to camp. And we had salmon for dinner that night, courtesy of Patty and Mike from Winter Harbor that sent us off with some big hunks of it. It was great. Had to just cook and chop it into smaller pieces to cook in our little pot because we didn't have a fry pan. But so any of these points, you know, always cause the seas to be kind of rough. So this was going around Quaquilo Point. I mean, there wasn't much wind and things are good, but, you know, there's still, as you can see, quite a bit of swell. That's going around Lawn Point, which looks like a lawn. We didn't stop, but apparently it's not really a lawn. It just looks like it. But, you know, and then you go around the corner and into Brooks Bay when you're past the point, and it's just beautiful. You know, hardly anything going on. So that's, I think Side Bay is just over there on our left, and that's where a group of people.
Right there.
Yeah, so that's where a group of people left from this summer on their trip around Brooks. And this was our campsite at Heater Point. There was fog that day that was coming and going, and you can kind of see some of the distance there. And that's a really nice campsite. You can walk over to the south-facing beach here, sort of through the trees, and nice little hike. Apparently, if you go there, I think there's some. If you go over to the rocks, there's a cave or something.
Cave? Oh, you didn't? Yeah.
No, we didn't go. I didn't know about it till afterwards.
The helicopter guy said he could actually go in the cave.
In the helicopter?
Yes.
In the helicopter?
No, this is good.
What?
You got really close.
Really? Yeah. No, we didn't know about it. So I have to go back, you know, and spend more time. So the next day going along towards Crabapple Islets was pretty much in the fog, and we were following the coastline all the way. And that's our landing at Crabapple Islet, so we could kind of see these lumps, and we were hoping that it was seaweed, not rocks, and it was seaweed. And that's happy hour knitting at the campsite at Crabapple Islands. Marg and I are trying to relax, because, you know, the Brooks is coming up. We get ourselves nervous.
What were you knitting?
Either socks or a hat. Had a few things going on, so I'm not sure which that one was. Marg was knitting socks.
You must have a lot of socks.
Yeah. Small portable projects. This is sunrise in the morning that we're heading off around the Brooks, and I was just thinking I have more pictures of sunrise. I don't have many sunsets. We were often up as the sun was rising, and we were usually in bed by sunset. That's a little bit later sunrise. And here we are heading off around Brooks, and it was a beautiful day, you know, sun's out, and weather's calm, there's not any wind. And Bob had the camera that day, so that's me and Marg out there, and we're heading out towards Solander Island. You can see the weather station on the top of Solander, right there. It was right around this point, Bob's clamoring, let's go around Solander, let's go around Solander. And Marg and I, we just wanted to get around the Brooks, right? And anyway, shortly after that, the decision was made for us, and that fog just came right in, and we couldn't see a thing. So again, there's no more pictures of going around the Brooks. We were in the fog, and there was debate on whether, you know, do you go out and you know, stay well away from it and follow your charts, or are we gonna, you know, stay close to shore? So it was kind of 2 against 1. I wanted to go out because I'm the one with the GPS and the navionics and all those things, but Marg and Bob wanted to stay close to shore within sight, so we were kind of going boomer to boomer to boomer, which was rather interesting for a while. It was kind of fun, until at one point, Marg was inside of a boomer and I was outside, and I knew she was there, and paddled on ahead, and I looked back over my shoulder, and there's Marg with wet hair and her hat on the back of her head, over her back, and anyway, one of the boomer had caught her, and she had rolled over, but fortunately she was able to roll back up again right away, so she was up before we knew it, so her training had paid off. And shortly after that, we could hear the crashing waves at Clerk Point. There's a big reef or something there, so that's when I took control with the navionics and took us out. And we're going away from all these rocks. So we went out and used navionics to, it's really easy on it to get a bearing. And then we all had our deck compasses, and then you could just follow the deck compass bearing, and it worked well. And there we are. I got my camera back from Bob at a bit of the beach earlier. This was landing at our Jacobson Point campsite. Bob coming in the fog. And the next day we woke up and it was a beautiful day, and we could see where we paddled from, and all was good. So I'm happy to be paddling away with Brooks behind us. And this was going towards the Acres Peninsula and then the Bunsbees, and you can see the fog was rolling back in again. Marg had never been to the Bunsbees, and we paddled through it and stopped for lunch, and she never did see any of it, so she has to go back there. She hadn't been to the mission group either, where this campsite is, and you know, it did rise enough that we could, you know, see this part and a little bit of a view, but she needs to go back to the mission group sometimes too. And the next day we had a great day of paddling and no wind, and went over to Rugged Point and along through there and around Tattoo Point, where I'd been last year with Tony, and he covered my back on that trip, and it was pretty hairy that time, and this time there was nothing going on. It was just a nice paddle.
So where's that, Tony?
Yeah, who knows where this picture is?
Do you know where that is?
I thought half the people here would know where that is.
Anyone know what that picture is, huh?
It's the view from the outhouse on Katella Island.
Oh.
You sit there, and that's what you look at.
The inside,
The
you're looking out.
Look,
yeah.
inside looking out. So I think the guide outfitters have made this outhouse. That's our campsite on Katella Island, and we actually had a few nights there. This is where Marg got sick. And so it was actually a good resting place for Bob and I, but Marg was pretty miserable for a couple of days there.
So by now it's August, right? You're doing this
Yeah,
since
yeah.
early August? Because we
Yeah.
were in that area, I think, when we had some chat back and forth.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we just kind of missed you guys.
Yeah. Just thinking about the fog, you're getting lots of fog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my comments here about the route. The last leg and this leg, fog was our main weather issue, not really wind. And it it continues, basically. So on this leg, we went from Takela Island down to, now I can't remember, is this
Kelvin
Nootka
Falls.
Island? Yeah.
Isn't it Kelvin?
Nootka, Kelvin Falls, and then around past Friendly Cove to just the north beach of Escalante Point, and then down the Hesperus Peninsula, past Perez Rocks to Anton Spit, over to Hot Springs Cove. And when we came out of Hot Springs Cove, we looked down one channel, and we looked out at the swell, and we were just tired of turbulent seas and worrying about the weather, and so we just turned down and went inside for us. Ginny's Beach, down Miller Channel to Cable, we call it Cable Beach, and then to, I just want to see what my comments were.
So that's us at Kelvin Falls, which is a really nice place to have a bath, wash your clothes, do all those kinds of things. And going along Bajo Reef, we've had a couple warnings about it can be difficult, but this is in the middle of Bajo Reef, and we were there on a good day, and there was nothing happening. Yeah. And this was on the way into Nootka, and there was lots of fishermen out that day, and consequently, I guess there's lots of fish there, so we also had a good whale day, but I didn't really get any pictures of the whales. And we stopped in at Friendly Cove to check it out, and this is the view there. If anybody doesn't know about the U-Chuck, this is a really good way, this U-Chuck boat that was there when we were there, it's a really good way to access the west coast. It leaves from Gold River, and there's numerous places that they will drop you off at and pick you up again a week later, and you can have a really nice trip. And we didn't stay there, we paddled on, and this was our campsite, the North Escalante. And this was our day paddling around down that Hesperus Peninsula and through Perez Rocks. Again, we had a good day for wind, but there was lots of swell, so Bob had the camera, and this was Find Elizabeth.
Where's Elizabeth? Where's Waldo?
Yeah, right there, there's
Yeah,
my
you
hat.
got it.
On the top of your head.
Yeah. There's Marg, she was there the whole time too. So we got around Perez Rocks, we went outside. Marg was fretting a little bit about this because she had gone inside those rocks on a trip with Kate, and we just said, no, we're going outside those rocks. So I don't know, when you were there, Tony, did you guys go inside or you went outside? Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And that's going around Esteban Point. Again, with the swell, and this was our campsite north of Anton Spit. Really beautiful in there, so that's another place I need to go back to. That's where the garden is. You can paddle way back in there to
Remember all that
Cougaranni's.
pink flower, is that fireweed there?
Yeah, it's fiery.
I remember that.
And the next day we paddled in fog. There's a bar that sticks out from that spit called Hesperus Bar, and sometimes it can be really treacherous, I understand, but there wasn't much happening there when we were there. And this was when we were outside of Hot Springs Cove deciding, do we go inside or do we go outside? And you can see it was quite swell and chop, and okay, we're going inside. And we paddled in and camped at a mediocre campsite inside there somewhere, but it was fine. And the next day, again, there was fog, so this was Marg taking a picture of me in the fog, but then it got really beautiful when the fog lifts and the sun was coming out, and made for some really nice picture taking. And then this is one of my favorite spots there. There's this waterfall in Miller Channel that you can paddle into this little grotto and go right into the waterfall. Don't know what it's called.
Shark Creek?
Might be. I don't know what it's called.
It's
It's
on
not.
the northeast side of Miller Channel.
Yeah. Shark Creek?
There's a campsite there as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we camped at this Cable Beach, we called it. I don't know what it's called either. It's before Tofino.
Cable Beach, there's a big sign that says cable.
Yeah.
That's a good name for it.
And this was our hotel room in Tofino, and I had to put this in there. I got a kick out of my program that puts pictures in and gives a little description of what it is, and it's usually a boat on the water or a person beside it. And this one it said, a messy room with lots of furniture. Anyway, that's another resupply day. So there's no, even just north of Tofino, we still didn't get cell reception, but we could send by the text message to our daughter Katie that was able to find us a last minute hotel room. So we had a hotel room for the night, and they were quite pleased about our trip, and they organized a hotel room in a different hotel for us the next night, so we had 2 nights in Tofino.
Liam of
Yeah.
Tatino Sea Kayaking was really good to us. He gave us a free run of his shop there, and we could store our kayaks there, and he didn't charge us anything, so it was really great.
And that was the view from our hotel room on the second day, so it was a pretty nice room. Yeah, it was beautiful weather too. So that's our leg 3 summary. We had the 12 paddling days with 4 rest days, and 180 miles and 15 miles per day average.
Oh, well, we can go back to that if you want. I'll go through this quickly so we can get to the photos. Went from Tofino to Radar Beach. It was foggy all through here, and we hit some headwinds there. Then Big Island at the mouth of Euclid Harbor, through Barclay Sound, around Cape Beale to Kehoe Beach, along the West Coast Trail to Cloos Beach, which is right just past Mcneil Narrows. Then Thrasher Cove near Port Renfrew, and Jordan River, Eastwood Park, and Discovery Island was our last campsite.
This was our campsite at Radar Beach, and that stretch from Tofino to Ucluelet's actually quite long, and it's quite difficult, and you're not really supposed to camp anywhere there because it's all national park. So Liam had told us that the South Beach, the last Radar Beach, there's several of them before, anyway, that there's no trail that gets there, so the camp wardens, the rangers never go in there, so that's where we should camp. So that's where we camped, and it was a great campsite. But again, another long carry, but at least it's sand. And this was paddling past Long Beach, and this was all that we saw of it. The fog was down most of the day, and this was another place where we used our navionics. And it's 7 miles along there, and it's basically like doing a long crossing. So that was Long Beach, and we stopped at further on at Florencia Islet, and it was really the only place to stop. And it was a difficult landing, and it was probably the most difficult landing of the whole trip for a lunch break. And anyway, we had to time the waves and everything to get back out again, but we did it. And then it was just solid fog all the rest of the way. And we was actually thankful to have had Marg with us because she spent the month of April in Ucluelet, so she was pretty familiar with the territory and knew where we were. So when we were going around Amphitrite Point, we were listening to the foghorn, and then there's a ringing bell and various things. So she knew all that, so we just followed her. And Big Island is just past the mouth of Ucluelet, and it was a nice place to camp. And then we left there and paddled out across Barclay Sound and through the Broken Group and through the Deer Group, and all in one day. Normally, we spend time in these places, but we were itching to get home, I guess, by then. And I had been worried about Cape Beale because when we met Sean and Leon, he had told us that was their most difficult place on their trip around the island. But for us, there was some swell, but it was all good. So it just shows conditions, just what you happen to come across on any given day can vary so much.
By this point, you're all very, very strong as well, so.
Yeah, we've had some miles under our belt, right? So we're getting kind of used to things, but so are they. And that's one is that Carmena? I sent some notes, but one of the lighthouses. Anyway, this is the Keha Bay, which is just before you get into. It's part of the national park. But you're allowed to camp there without a reservation. Once you get onto the West Coast Trail, you're supposed to have reservations and everything. So this was the start of the smoke in the air. So that's sunrise and the smog. Paddling across Pachina Bay, I think, in the smog. That's the Pachina Bay Lighthouse.
Again, we had good conditions without wind, but, a little bit of swell. And paddling along the West Coast Trail was kind of a special experience for me, because I'd hiked that a bunch of times since the 70s, but I'd never seen it from the water, so it was great. That's the closest we got to Nipnat Falls. Again, Bob was wanting to land, but Marg and I always veto the surf landing, so this is as close as we got. There's not a lot of places to land on the West Coast Trail. You're not supposed to camp on the beaches, and there are all surf landings on the beaches, and then there's this shelf that goes all the way along. So it's the shelf that makes it so dangerous for the mariners. So we landed at nice beach around a corner at Close, which is First Nations land and isn't part of the park. So we were hoping that they weren't going to come along and kick us off, and they didn't. And that's cabbage that keeps really well in your boat. Bob's making our cabbage salad. And Marg being goofy, listening to the marine radio in the morning with the smoggy sunrise.
Did you see hikers on the trail?
We did. We saw lots of hikers on the trail.
You see them in the water?
Walking on the beaches. And, well, I don't know that we kept waving, and nobody ever waved at us, so I don't think they're looking out there in the water when they're walking.
We saw more hikers on the Wandafuka Trail.
Yeah, we saw lots of hikers there too.
Did you stop in for burgers?
No.
We didn't. No. So I'm not sure if it was actually even running. We didn't do much stopping. Again, paddling in the smog. And as you can see, that shelf is running all the way along there. Yeah, got a bunch of those pictures. So this was heading into, that's the bay that goes into Port Renfrew, or I think Port San Juan, it's called on the chart. So we wanted to go in there to Thrasher Cove so we didn't have to do a surf landing. And it's also not part of the park, so you don't have to have a reservation. So we go paddling in there to find out that everybody's starting the West Coast Trail and everybody's ending the West Coast Trail, all camp at Thrasher Cove. So there was a lot of people. And Rob Zacharias just told me last week, well, right there, probably about where Marg is, if you go into the left, is another beach that you can't walk to, and it would have been a great campsite. But we were tired and not looking. We were just going for it. This was the next day, paddling along the Wandafuka Trail. And Bob doesn't like that picture, so I'll stop, go back here.
We like it.
We were thinking we were almost home, right? And, we're going around Sombrio Point, so we stopped at Sombrio Beach for lunch, and there's lots of surfers out, and we watched the surfers. We actually had to do a surf landing to stop for that lunch. So anyway, we get off again out through the surf, and just then the fog came down, the wind came up, and the current was coming out of the strait, and they all met at that point. And it was one of the roughest, most exciting 10 minutes of the entire trip, was going around little old Sombrio Point. So that picture was just Sombrio Point's in the background. The fog had lifted again by then, so I was just happy that we were all surviving. There I thought, here we've come this far, and I'm going to call an SOS on my inReach, and Anyway, we didn't. But by the time we got to, this is the campsite, commercial campsite, municipal campsite at Jordan River, and all the windsurfers were out having a great time, so I'm of the opinion if the windsurfers are out, the kayakers shouldn't be out, so we stayed there. We actually had an extra day there too. And then we paddled off and heading towards Souk. And that's our campsite at East Souk Park, where you're not supposed to camp, and don't tell anybody, but it's a great campsite at Cabin Point. So we didn't put up our tents until we were pretty sure that everybody had gone for the day. And then we basically paddled point to point, Albert Head to William Head, and cut every corner that we could, going around to Victoria again through the smog, until we got there. Yeah. Yay, we got to make it. And we had to paddle from there to Discovery Island, and this is us on our last morning, setting off for our paddle. Yes, we're going to get there. And, the sea was like glass, and it was like smog, and we had this welcoming committee waiting for us, so thanks to all the Siska members that came out to greet us. It was really very special. Yeah. Anyway, there we are, Bobby and the Sea Stars. We made it all the way around. Tofino to here, hey? Yes.
Wow.
Wouldn't do that, you know, I mean, that, we'd been paddling for a while, so that was good, yes.
Go to the next slide.
And there's our total trip summary, 678 miles and 58 days on the trip, 44 paddling days and 14 rest days. And I just happened to see that quote a month or two ago and I thought, oh, that's perfect for us. It always seems impossible until it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so there, it's only a couple minutes after 9. So this is the time where I put some statistics up there if anybody's interested in reading them, but we also thought it was a good time if anybody wanted to ask any further questions.
No orcas, that's amazing.
No orcas. Some great whales.
Did you check your prescriptions before you?
Bob didn't, but I did, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So is it officially the longest circumnavigation?
Yeah, well, no, it's not. I have read about a guy in Tofino that spent 4 months doing it a whole pile of years ago. But, so Body Boat Blade has the Jellyfish Award, which you have to start and stop from Orcas Island. We were too lazy to go over to Orcas Island to participate. But their Jellyfish Award, and they get a Werner paddle, and it's 55 days. So we beat the Jellyfish Award, and if we'd have gone over to Orcas Island, we'd have beat it even more. But we weren't in the running because we didn't go to Orcas. So we think we should start a Sea Star Award for starting and stopping somewhere on Vancouver Island, like anywhere, and see if anybody can beat 58 days. So,
We can do it, we can do that.
Yeah.
Hey, we did 34 for Port Hardy to Tofino.
That's right, yeah. Anyway. Yes?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
I was wondering what the brand of that water filter was using.
It's called Rapid Pure. And I ordered it from MEC online. They're online, but not, they don't have them in the store. I think Capital Iron has them in the store though. Yeah. The Skills uses that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Were your 11 by 17 charts double-sided?
No. No. We could have probably saved on some paper, but we also broke them up and sent them with our food boxes, right? So we weren't carrying all 100 and some pages all the time.
It already is a challenge to use that photocopier at
Yeah.
state also. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you make out for water?
Good. Yeah. It didn't seem to be a problem. I mean, we were careful with our water, but we each had basically 2 10-liter bags with us. And, you know, we only had to fill up from a stream once in a while, not very often between all of that. So, yeah. Yeah.
Aside from the shredded tent, did you have any other equipment breakdowns that you had to deal with along the way?
No, nothing. I think, you know, sort of the preventative maintenance, you know, on the boats before we left and making sure that everything was good. The only other issue we had was Marg skeg that, you know, we thought for a while it was broken, but it was actually just stuff in there. And once we got it cleaned out, and then we had to keep cleaning it, it was good. Yeah, no other equipment problems.
Missing spoons.
Pardon me?
Missing spoons.
Oh, missing spoons, yeah.
A question on your refuse.
Yes, we carried some of it, and we actually burned a lot of it.
The plastics.
Yeah, you know, we had some discussion about what we should do with things, and we had small fires in the evening below the high tide mark. Not every evening, but some evenings, and we actually burned quite a bit of plastic. We actually burned a lot of the plastic. Marg she's from Alberta, right? And, you know, it's just oil product, and it just burns and it goes up in the air. So we burned, you know, plastic bottles that we found on our beaches and things too. We just stood out of the way of the smoke, and it actually burned really well. Yeah. I was surprised at the amount of stuff she could burn. We have a pile of plastic that, you know, just feeding one piece at a time into the fire, and it disappeared pretty quick.
If you wanted to do like a chunk of it, a stretch of it, to try it and not have the commitment of doing the whole circumnavigation, I was thinking as you're leaving from Tofino, we all know that coastline. I mean, you could take Tofino back to Victoria. Would that be a good thing to try, or is that rougher water?
You know,
would you want to do a different stretch to start out?
I wouldn't do that as a stretch to start out, mostly because there's not a lot of places to stop. Right? There's not a lot of pull-out opportunity. There's not many people that seem to kayak that area, actually. Yeah. You know, There's several other good routes that, any of those portions are good, but the best way, if you haven't been out there, is to go out on the U-Chuck. It'll take you out to Rugged Point or Cattell Island or the New Chatlets and do a trip out there. And yeah, that's great. I love that boat. Yeah. Good. Well, you can ask us questions anytime too. So anyway, thanks a lot, everybody.
What an incredible adventure, and for people that have never put a show together, that was really well done. You guys knocked it out. Thank you very much. And to show our appreciation, we've got each one of you one of our much sought after Siska mugs. And I know that Bob's going to share his with Marg. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next month will be Mike Jackson. So his shows are always pretty good. So. Ellen, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we're complete. I'll just ask anybody else if there's any final announcements for the evening. Have I forgot or you forgot? No?
Just a quick comment, would everyone stack their cups? Those are compostable, so it saves a bunch of us from skirting around on the floor.